Hi, I'm Casey Deary, and I'd like to spend a minute to talk to you about bridle bits and the process that I go through when I'm starting my 2-year-olds transitioning into a broke horse. So in the beginning, we like to start all of our horses in just a plain hackamore. I want to keep it as close to what that baby is comfortable with and related with as possible. I like to stress them as little as I can possibly get away with. So we'll spend 3 or 4 days, 5 days riding them in just a plain halter and lead rope. And then once I feel like they're comfortable with me being up there, then I transition into a hackamore. Now this is a very soft hackamore. You can see that it's folded here. Not that there is a fold, but you can see that it's pliable. That means there's not a cable inside here. This is all hand braided. That's very, very soft. There's nowhere on that baby's nose that we can bite it. So I spend as long as I can possibly spend in this hackamore getting that horse soft and broke, teaching it to walk, trot, lope, stop, back, turn each way. And I ride them in that as long as each horse will let me. Some of them will let me ride them for 3 months, and some of them are gonna let me ride them for 3 weeks. So it depends on that horse on how long I can stay in it. If I get to a spot where I feel like I need to stay in this, but I don't have enough control in that soft hackamore, I have a braided hackamore here, and that's just 4 picking strings that are tied together. So this has got a little more bite than what that soft hackamore does. So when I feel like I need a little extra help, I can hang that on their nose for a few days while I'm riding them, and in 2 or 3 days they get soft, then I can go back to my nice hackamore. Once I've transitioned out of the hackamore, then we go to a snaffle bit. And I like to make sure that I start those babies in the beginning with a lightweight ring snaffle. What I have today here is a D ring. So basically the difference between an O ring and a D ring is how much signal there is in that individual bridle. So an O ring snaffle is going to have more signal than a D ring or an egg bar. When I say signal, I mean how much warning time before I actually get a hold of that baby. So in this D ring snaffle, the headstall is going to move over the top and the bridle rein is going to move around the backside there. The mouthpiece is stationary. So in an O-ring snaffle, that mouthpiece will also move. So I have 3 opportunities to signal my horse in an O-ring snaffle. Once they understand that O-ring and I'm ready to start stepping it up, then I can put them into this D-ring, and it takes a little bit of the warning out of it. That's the only difference in the D, and that's D in an O-ring. So the larger the ring, the more signal time that I have. The smaller the ring, the quicker it reacts on that horse. So I look for something that's about that diameter. Most of my snaffles are that way. Once I go through this particular bridle, then I like to move to what's called my gag snaffle. So this is what I transition in from a snaffle bit to a shanked bridle. It incorporates what they learned in that snaffle, but it also starts to put the foundation down for a shanked bridle. This rope has a lot of bend in it, so that allows me, when I pick up, there's no way I can be too fast. So as I pull, that rope turns, and there's a whole lot of warning that says, hey bud, I'm fixed to get a hold of you. So you can see here that this slides up and down, but it's fairly stiff. It doesn't just run like a typical string gag or a sliding gag. So this is a little bit more signal here. The other thing it does for me is as I pull on this and I start pulling back, it gives me a little pressure over their bonnet. So in the beginning, I want to start teaching that horse how, as I draw, they yield their neck from the wither forward, and I start breaking them loose from the wither forward there, again with a little help from that pressure over the bonnet. Once I've got them in this, and they spend a few weeks or a month, whatever I need to spend there, then I like to transition to a correctional bridle. This is a small V correctional opposed to a normal correctional. You can see how the bottom of that mouthpiece is spread open a little bit. I try to give my horses as much room for their tongue to go here as I can possibly give them. The other thing that I want to point out is how this is nice and round on the edge here. There's not a connection at the bottom that will bite down on that horse's bars. So I want to make sure this is as smooth as I can make it, and I want to make sure there's enough room here for that horse's tongue. Now, in the beginning of putting them in a shank bridle, I never have anything on the curb, okay? I do that because through the process of the last year riding them through that snaffle and the gag, they have not ever had anything touch them in the chin. So I never want to transition that horse from a snaffle bridle to a shanked bridle with the curb immediately. I want them to learn how to accept this, and I want them to understand what the signal is before I ever attach a curb to it, okay? So once I know that horse understands exactly what that curb bridle is telling them, then I move into a very similar curved bridle. I call this a slider, and you can see it has a little bit of a gag action also where it slides up and down. And they'll spend a few days riding in that with nothing, and then we add a leather curb. So I want to make sure that I don't ever introduce that curb to them with a chain. I never want it to be a sharp or offensive feel there as I pull. So I always teach them that that leather curb is coming not necessarily to scald them, but I want them to understand that I can help fold their body up with that leather curb. So they're going to learn how to ride in that leather curb, and then they'll transition into a chain. Once they've been through that, I like to go to a solid bridle. So we're talking about middle part of their 3-year-old year usually for me. Not necessarily this is a solid cheek and a solid mouthpiece. I like to use a solid mouth with a loose cheek in the beginning. You notice how this particular bridle has a lot of sweep here off that horse's tongue. So there's nothing here that is going to be harsh or severe. This area right here of the mouthpiece is where the majority of the severity is determined. So this bridle can go way up into that horse's mouth as long as it gets narrower as it goes up into that top palate. I can make this bridle as soft as anything I can hang in there depending on how I pull. But I want to make sure that here, any bridle that I put on, I want them to understand that this point right here is how I determine the severity. And I'll show you this bridle, which we don't use much of. A lot of times my older horses need to be schooled. You can see there's plenty of room for that horse's tongue, but it has this little part that comes around the port where the bars connect. So as this moves over underneath their tongue, it actually bites under their tongue. A lot of those correctional bridles are connected the same way where there's a sharp edge here. So when you're picking your bridle out or you're riding your horse, if you feel like I have too much bridle or I need more bridle, have a look at the way it's connected there, because that will determine a lot of how quick your signal is or how soft that bridle is in their mouth.